I'm here today with Mabel Ninan, author of a new book titled Far From Home, Discovering Your Identity as Foreigners on Earth. Here's the book. Born and raised in the minority Christian community in India, Mabel moved to the U.S. in 2008 and lives in Silicon Valley. Her family has called 10 different places across 2 continents and several cities home. A contributor to Guideposts All God's Creatures, Daily Devotions for Animal Lovers 2022, Mabel's writings have appeared in The Upper Room, CBN.com, Leading Hearts Magazine, and Encourage Me. Host of the YouTube podcast Immigrant Faith Stories, she's been serving in women's ministry for nearly a decade. Mabel's pursuing an MA in Theological Studies from the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. She's also an alum of our Publishing and Color conferences. You can learn more at mabelninan.com. Let me spell that, MABELNINAN.com. So Mabel, thanks so much for joining us. Congratulations on all your work.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having this conversation, for this opportunity. It's such a privilege and honor to be talking with you.
Well, I'm always thrilled when one of the conference alums come out with a new book, these things are years in the making and quite an accomplishment. So I'm always thrilled when I'm able to talk with someone like you. So maybe to get started, can you tell folks what else you'd like them to know about you besides what I briefly touched on?
Yeah. So for the fun part, I don't like pizzas. I don't eat pizza. I love ice cream. I could eat it every day. But my background, which I don't talk about much in the book, I had a business background, a management background before moving here to the U.S. I did my MBA in HR and marketing and worked across different industries in various management roles, and I enjoyed that a lot. And also, for as long as I remember, I was serving in youth ministry, and I still do enjoy talking with young people and interacting with young people. I never thought I would be involved in women's ministry because at that time I thought women cried a lot. I didn't want to be women because they would make everything into something emotional. But that's where, I started out in ministry and serving God among young people. And I headed a team of young people who were doing choreography, dance, and praise worship. And that is also something most people don't know about me because I've always been a dancer growing up from the time I was a little girl. But then God used that passion in a completely different way. And I taught young people how to use their talents of dance to worship God and glorify God that way.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, we both had a career transition from business to Christian publishing space. So that's really great to see. So before we get to your book, you've also written a lot for Guideposts, and Guideposts has been a regular member of our conferences as well. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Sure. So I auditioned for Guideposts All God's Creatures. I came to know about the audition through the newsletter, Publishing in Color. And I think they said that they wanted writers. And I jumped at it because I knew that it brought together 3 of my passions or loves, which is love for animals, love for writing, and love for God and love for scripture. And in these devotions combine them in such a beautiful way. And it's something that I think along those lines when I see animals or nature. So that was something that aligned with my natural gifting or natural interests. And so I auditioned, and Soshi, whom you know, Soshi Dixon, she was at that time writing for Guideposts, and she came alongside me as a mentor to write Far From Home. But at the same time, when this project came, I did write my devotions, sent it to her to edit them, and she helped me spruce them up. And I was so surprised, completely excited when they said that I passed and they wanted to publish my devotions. And this is my 3rd year doing that for them.
That's so cool. I'm so glad to hear that too. That's a small world, isn't it? All these connections are just amazingly, pay off in different ways.
Yeah.
So speaking of which, your book, Far From Home, published by Harambe Press. And Peter Purkis Perkins has, spoken at several of our conferences too. Can
Yeah.
you just talk a little bit about how you got connected with her and how the book, came about?
Yeah. Um, Again, it's one of those stories that it just has to be God who can do this or who can connect, Edwina and me in such a way. I was at the Colorado Christian Writers Conference, and I think this was 2018. That was my first conference ever. And I went with my manuscript there, and in that manuscript, I wrote about parenting an immigrant child, what it, all the difficulties, the challenges, but drawing out spiritual truths. And Cheryl read that. I had an appointment with her. She owns EA Publishing, which is kind of a hybrid publishing. And I was so new. I didn't know the difference between hybrid and self and nothing. But she read my manuscript and she said, "This is great." And I was in tears, and she had asked me to stop crying so she could give me her comments, because I never heard anyone, say nice things about my manuscript. It was the first time. And she said, "I know of someone who will be interested in this kind of work." And Harambe Press just got started, or I think it was in the initial stages. And after the conference, she's the one who wrote to Edwina. Edwina
Wow.
wasn't even there, and said, "You should meet Mabel." And that's how we got connected. And I sent her my basic draft, my manuscript. And at that time, I wrote from a completely different perspective. I was writing for immigrants to kind of encourage them as they go through their struggles and challenges like I had, and use scripture and draw out truth to encourage them. And at the conference, a lot of people told me that this is too niche. We don't know how to target immigrant Christians.
Hmm.
We don't know, nothing about them. So I kept getting that feedback. And then someone told me, "Why don't you turn this around and tell us teach us how we can learn from your experience of living as a foreigner? Since we are all foreigners on earth, you have that perspective. And so why don't you write to a broader Christian audience, but use your experience to convey that lesson?" And so again, I went back to Edwina and said, "Okay, I'm revising this manuscript. Can you
Wow.
have a look at it?" She was gracious enough to have a look at it. And at first she said that, "I don't see you in it. I need more of you." And I revised it again. And so she was grateful, was again gracious and kind to come across and said, "Yes, we need more of your stories." And so that's how this book came about. And then finally, when I found Karen Numer, who's my agent, and we decided to approach Edwina because she already had the manuscript. She had seen it go through different revisions, and we sent it through her. And that's how, God put it on her heart to come alongside me on this journey. And I was praying that it should be someone who feels passionately about this project as much as I do, and who can support this message of the book. And that's how Edwina and I came together. But it was a long 3 years.
Wow. That's amazing though. I mean,
Yeah,
just the fact that, you've gotten relationships with so many folks that I know too, and have worked with. It's really wonderful when kind of a community works together and supports each other. It's just
absolutely.
love that aspect of this work. So, has the fact that you lived in 10 different places kind of impacted your worldview and your writing?
Absolutely. I think at first it was definitely challenging because I'm not that kind of a person. I was born and raised in one place. I never thought, I'll be moving around that much. And so I think at the core, I'm not a nomad. I want stability. I want to be in one place geographically. I don't like too much change. And I feel like moving around in so many different places tested my faith in ways that I didn't expect it to. I didn't realize how much change was going to affect me. And so um, in one way, it was a struggle, but through that struggle, God really showed me that no matter what changes, right, that he was not going to change, and that um, I can base my hope and put my trust in him rather than in everything around me. And so spiritually, I think it has definitely matured me and grown me, refined me in so many ways. Um, but I also think that it has changed my writing because meeting so many different people, being in so many different cultures, I think it has made me a better person, made me more patient. I've learned about, different kinds of people, and that definitely helps me when I write because I come from a place of empathy. At least I want to. That's what I aspire to, a more compassionate place. Um, and because I know how different people think, that they're different perspectives. Mine is not the only one, and I'm not right all the time.
Hmm. So you talk about being homesick for heaven.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
um, so I have experienced homesickness, on a real, very raw level because of just leaving home, which was India to me. And then every time I would make a home somewhere and move, I didn't know. Now, what am I feeling homesick for? Was it my previous home, or was it my home for India, or was it my longing for India? And so homesickness just really got too complicated for me. And even now, sometimes I struggle with it. It could be anything could trigger it, right? It's Indian food, or just watching an Indian movie, or being with Indian friends, or a childhood memory or something. It just triggers that homesickness, the longing that I feel to be with, my culture, my family, and most of my family is still there. So that's why I do feel homesick. But then I thought about it, that it's actually a shadow of my homesickness for my permanent home, which is heaven, because we long to be, with God, in God's presence. At least I do. And um, there's always that gap, or when I'm not able to be with him always due to whatever things that are happening around us, circumstances, or our own suffering and sin that keeps me from being intimate with God. But that longing is always there. And I know that it will be fully gone, or I will be, when I'm united with God one day in heaven, that that will be home for me, just being in his presence and being with him all the time without any restrictions or boundaries.
Hmm.
And so that is actually the homesickness I want to feel, and I want to continue to have that, because that, I think, in a way, is a sign that I love God and I want to be closer to him and desire him more.
Hmm. So I don't know if you know this, Michael, but I worked for Frederick Buechner
I
before I
know.
started writing for your life, and one
Yeah.
of his books is titled "The Longing for Home."
Ah,
So it's a whole book basically around the topic that you're discussing here.
oh, I
It's
love to read that. I only read two of his books, and I love his writing.
it's amazing, absolutely amazing. um, so I'd like to read an endorsement from our friend Sharon Norris Elliott. She says, "You will come away from this amazing work with your priorities in their proper place, knowing more assuredly than ever that heaven is your real home." So how would you say that your book helps with that prioritization?
Um, I think when we see ourselves as foreigners on earth, um, it conveys this truth that you don't belong here, that you're just passing through, that your life here is a journey. And to give an example, I mean, recently I was in, this was just 10 days ago, I was in Washington, D.C. for a quick, for a conference for 2 days. And then immediately we flew to Hawaii for a vacation. So, but the way I packed for Washington, D.C., business casuals, and I was focused on the conference, and I knew I had something to do there, and I was focused on that. When I went to Hawaii, we knew it was a week of fun, and we just, got out the swim stuff and the hiking clothes, and that's what we were doing. And that's what I think, that when you see yourself here on earth, uh, your life here is a journey, and it has a mission, it has a purpose. Um, and so that helps you prioritize your life. If your purpose is to be a light to the people here and to represent God well, then that is what your life should be all about. Just like, I'm in DC for a business trip, and that's what that trip was all about. I'm not distracted by, I really couldn't do any sightseeing. I was not distracted by, meeting friends or hiking, nothing. That was my purpose. And I think that when we see ourselves as um, people here, that our life is short, unpredictable, and transient, but it has purpose and meaning. And that helps us prioritize our decisions. It helps us prioritize, how we raise our kids, that it's all geared toward that one goal of glorifying God, of serving God, and loving his people at the end of the day.
So what would be the one thing you'd like people to take away from the book?
Oh, there's so much, but at the core of it, I feel like this part of our identity has been ignored or overlooked for a long time. This part of our Christian identity, that we are sojourners, or that we are citizens of heaven. We all know, and that we are children of God, that he loves us. We are given purpose and value by him. We all know that we are holy priests and all that. But this is like the missing part of our identity, that if we embrace fully, we can really live with purpose, because we see the urgency of our time here. And that encourages us to just boldly live for God. And so that is what I would want readers to take away, is to dig into that part of our identity, that we are foreigners on earth, that we are citizens of heaven, and that we owe allegiance to God and to his kingdom over everything else on this earth.
Mm. So I have to ask you about Silicon Valley, since I worked in high tech for many years with many people from India and with many people in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
What's the Asian community in Silicon Valley like these days?
I can only talk from what I know from my personal experience. I've lived here 3 years, and um, I the statistics show that this city is at least 30% Asian, and I see that a lot. And there are so many more Indians here. We were so surprised when we came here to find a large population of Indians, and even more surprising that how many of them were Christians.
Hmm.
Uh, and I think there are a lot of first generation immigrants too that I find among Asians. So in that way, it was very easy for me to find community, unlike any other place I've ever been, because there are so many first generation immigrants here, having kids like me, raising kids, in between cultures and living in between cultures. But that's interesting. It's the first time that I've lived in such a diverse place. I mean, I lived in LA too, but the Asian population is not as much. And some people would say, I've heard this say from others, that with more Asians in schools, you tend to the focus tends to be on academics. So, and I see that it's really very competitive for children, a competitive environment for sure, very tech focused.
Yeah.
Coding classes for kids starting from kindergarten. The library had free
Oh my
coding
goodness.
classes.
Wow.
2 years ago, my son did free coding classes at the library, and I was so surprised. But
I'm
all
just
kinds of,
jealous. Yeah, I'm
yeah,
just jealous
robotic
because when I was a
classes,
kid,
and
didn't have that kind of thing.
yeah, that's interesting.
So I'm going to struggle probably with the pronunciation of this, but there's an area of India that I think it's called Kerala. Is that
Mhm.
correct? It's the southeast area of India,
Mhm.
southwest, I'm sorry, southwest, that the Christian history of that goes back centuries and centuries and centuries, well before Christianity was introduced to many other places in the world. Is that the part of India you're from, or do you have any ties to that?
No, yeah, well, my husband is from Kerala. You're
Okay.
right. And say, many people believe that it was Thomas, the disciple of Jesus,
Yeah.
who landed there. And my husband's family and a lot of the Christians who come from Kerala see themselves as in some way connected to, the early Jews intermingling with the Christians in that area. So you're right about that. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. That's
Mhm.
just some amazing history that I wasn't aware of until a few years ago.
Yeah.
So I know you're in the midst of, introducing a great new book, but I have to ask you, do you have any plans for future books?
Absolutely. I am, considering writing an anthology, not an anthology, but a collection of essays
Hmm.
about the immigrant experience
Hmm.
because there's just so much to say about it, and I wrote one of the chapters already about how we deal with distance and how immigrants kind of are well versed in long distance relationships, what
Hmm.
that entails. And there is guilt with it, but there is, because we have parents there and who's taking care of them and we go back and forth. But also we become experts at using technology to keep in touch with family back home, or especially immigrants who have parents, immediate family members. How do they deal with long distance relationship? So that's one of the many facets of the immigrant experience. I'm just trying to write essays, and that book would be for first generation immigrants, just to know that they're not alone, and that in all the things that we face, we're all in there together. It's not a book that complains about anything, but just uh, draws out those struggles in real ways. I'm also working on a book for Lent, or their Lent devotions. I wrote it sometime in 2018, 40 different devotions for Lent, and I have to go back and revise that. And depending on the feedback for Far From Home, I was thinking of devotional or a Bible study based on it, because
Hmm.
I realized a lot of people ask me questions about the backing behind this and the
Hmm.
scriptures behind this that go through. And in a way, in Far From Home, I do explore biblical migrant heroes like, Abraham and Moses and Joseph, and how all of them moved and how God uses that migration to accomplish his purposes. So there is a Bible study in there somewhere. And just last night, I was telling God, I have all these projects. God, you show me how to prioritize and which ones to go with first. So
Good for you that you've got a lot to choose from. That's
yeah,
a great sign.
thank you.
So as we mentioned, the name of this book is Far From Home, Discovering Your Identity as Foreigners on Earth. It's out now from Harambee Press, and you can learn more at mabelninan.com. So Mabel, again, congratulations on all your work. I'm so happy for you, and wish you the best for this book and your future books.
Thank you so much, Brian. And thank you for all that Publishing in Color is doing. I really appreciate the efforts you put into elevating the voices of authors of color. And it's so important. And thank you for having me on your podcast.
Certainly, my pleasure. Thank you.